objective, after listening to this module, you'll be able to describe some personality types that are more prone to stress. Stress-prone personalities. Personality makes us who we are. Did you know that personality influences nearly every aspect of our lives, including what we choose to do for a living, how we interact with our families, and our choice of friends and romantic partners? Let's talk about some personality types that are more prone to stress. Those with the stress-prone personality typically tend to stress out more often and to a greater extent than those with the stress-resistant personality. Perhaps the most stress-prone personality type is Type A. This personality type was first identified in the 1960s. Take a look at some characteristics of Type A personality. Time urgency and impatience. People who often get frustrated when having to wait in line, who constantly interrupt others, or who always seem to be in a hurry are exhibiting this Type A characteristic. Polyphagia. This refers to multitasking or always doing more than one thing at a time. Ultra-competitiveness. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be involved in a little healthy competition every so often, but being ultra-competitive about everything is indicative of a Type A personality. Manipulative control. This refers to someone who is domineering and controlling and somewhat of a bully. Hyper-aggressiveness and hostility. Someone who is overly aggressive and hostile is usually rude and often raises his or her voice, gets easily upset over small things or has a short fuse, and refuses to see the other person's point of view during conflict. Type A personality is not either or, you're either Type A or you're not. It can be seen on a continuum. Most of us probably have exhibited one or more Type A personality traits at some point in our lives, so don't stress out if you have one or more of these characteristics. It's not necessarily unhealthy to exhibit some Type A behaviors at times. The question is, to what extent are you Type A? Obviously, the more Type A traits you exhibit and the more often that you exhibit them, the more likely you're Type A. A person on the extreme Type B side is someone who is extremely laid back, probably too laid back because they never get anything accomplished. Type C and D are somewhere in the middle. Not super uptight, but not too laid back either. I do need to mention that one of these Type A characteristics has been strongly associated with heart disease and is considered the most detrimental to our health, and that is hyper-aggressiveness and hostility. Having a hurried and impatient Type A personality doesn't necessarily put you at risk for coronary heart disease. If you're racing around because you're a go-getter, meaning that you're enthusiastic and positive, that doesn't hurt you. The hostile Type A's, on the other hand, react to anger with an excess of adrenaline, which puts them at much more at risk for heart disease. Codependent personality. Another stress-prone personality is a codependent personality. Individuals with a strong codependent personality base their feelings of self-worth and self-identity on the approval of others. Characteristics of a codependent personality include believing one cannot survive without a particular relationship, being addicted to relationships, fearing abandonment, over-controlling, over-trusting, approval seekers, overachievers, perfectionists, and victims. Helpless, hopeless personality. Somewhat similar to a codependent personality, a person with a helpless, hopeless personality feels like he or she has no control over what happens to them. They feel that their life is largely controlled by external events. The cumulative impact of stress may lead a person to a state of learned helplessness. This concept was developed by Seligman in 1975 through a series of experiments with dogs. Seligman exposed the dogs to conditions under which they could not alleviate the stress encountered. As a result, the dogs became passive and accepting of stressful circumstances. Seligman paralleled the dog's state of learned helplessness to the human state of depression. When you feel like there's nothing you can do about something, you might exhibit helpless, hopeless characteristics. Have you ever seen a sports team or individual athlete give up in a sporting event in which they were losing by a long shot? The score is 100 million to 0 and their performance becomes way below what they're capable of. Maybe you've felt this way after being continually passed over for a promotion at work despite your superior performance or accomplishments. Why try when it doesn't help? Someone with the helpless, hopeless personality usually gives up fairly easy and quickly when things get tough. Depression is strongly associated with the helpless, hopeless personality. External LOC. The concept associated with a helpless, hopeless personality type is an external locus of control, or LOC. Someone with a strong external LOC feels that external events rule their life. They don't feel that they have control over what happens to them. Nothing is their fault, and they feel that their external environment determines the circumstances of their life. An athlete who skips practices and then blames the loss of the game on poor officiating. A student who doesn't study and then blames the professor for his or her poor grade. An employee who constantly arrives late to work and is not very productive and blames his or her poor evaluation on an unfair boss. A person who doesn't have the self-discipline to live within his or her means and then blames the high cost of living for his or her debt. People who expect to have exceptions made for them also are exhibiting an external LOC. The person who gets upset because the restaurant will not honor an expired coupon. The person who expects the police officer not to give a ticket because he or she was going only so many miles over the speed limit are displaying an external LOC. On the other hand, someone with a strong internal LOC feels that they are completely in charge of what happens to them. Even if there was poor officiating and unfair calls made, athletes with a strong internal LOC will focus on what they could have done better, not on the poor officiating. Even if the exam was written poorly by the professor, a student with a strong internal LOC will focus on the fact that he or she could have studied harder and will brainstorm how they can study better next time. A man who was serving time in prison was going to be released early for good behavior, but he wanted to finish out his sentence because, unlike 99% of other prisoners, he admitted his guilt. He said that he deserved to finish his time because he had committed the crime. Perhaps that is the best example of a strong internal LOC. LOC is a very important concept in terms of managing stress. The more in control of their lives that people feel, the less likely they are to feel stressed. People with a strong internal LOC may still get stressed, but it's most likely less often and to a lesser degree than someone with a strong external LOC. Key points. Perhaps the most stress-prone personality is Type A, and the most dangerous characteristic of Type A is hyperaggressiveness and hostility. Other stress-prone personalities are codependent and helpless-hopeless. Internal versus external LOC is an important concept in terms of how we deal with stress. And that's it.